Hello, hello. This is the My Artifact episode number 3646. Today's date is October 16, 2025. It's been almost like night at 9:23 p.m. All right, let's just jump directly to the question. Let's go. Okay, question is, what if Renaissance spread to the America first? Oh, okay, that's a really good question. That's legit good question. Okay, first of all, what is exactly and why am I asking this question to myself? This is what if question. Why am I asking this question? What if question is always kind of like a really interested way to give the answer. It kind of like a only force you to think about that question. It's kind of like a creates its own reality. Like basically it's this thing na ki what if question is like a, I don't know how do I supposed to explain. Like basically it's this thing you create that reality according to the knowledge that you have. So it kind of like a force you to think about what would be that particular world. Also, disclaimer, the information that I'm trying to tell you regarding about this question is not exactly right or is not exactly wrong either. It's my opinion, it's my thought process, it's raw, it's unfiltered. That's why I'm kind of like trying to telling this thing. So don't seek this information as a kind of like a really correct way. If you need a kind of like correct information, you have multiple sources, internet, AI, ChatGPT, lot of stuff. Go there, find the perfect kind of like some information. This is just my opinion regarding about what I think about this particular stuff. Now let's jump back to the question. Now question says that what if the Renaissance spread into the American first? First of all, let's just understand the question. Okay. First of all, what is actually Renaissance? Okay. So Renaissance is an era. It's called kind of like some era, like a Jurassic Park or Jurassic World. Like this is called kind of like a some era where kind of like a some most of the animals are dinosaur. So that's why we call them as a Jurassic era or things like that. Okay, yeah. Renaissance era is also called as a kind of like a something era where humans are kind of like a develop skills like a painting, drawing, like painting, kind of like a some machines and things like that. Usually, Renaissance era is actually started from 1200 to kind of like only 16 to 1700. Okay, like basically today's world, like basically today's date is that today's date is a 16th of October 2025. Okay, yeah. So almost like a 200 year before, 200 300 year before. Okay, yeah. That means like it started the Renaissance era is actually like a, it's not have a kind of like a perfect exact date where it start, but possibly most of people are actually assume that ki since the 1200 to 1700, 17 to 1800, that is called kind of like a Renaissance era. And usually the Renaissance era is actually mostly in Europe, because the rest of the country, like the rest of the world, is not actually called as a kind of like Renaissance. Because if I'm gonna say Renaissance era, that means specifically this kind of like a 500 600 year are in Europe. Okay, specifically in Europe. Okay. Okay, so what is exactly is this era? Like what is there? Why this kind of like so much emphasis on this kind of like era? What is actually happened in this particular time? So many things actually happened. Okay, yeah. Like basically this is in this particular era, humans are kind of like somebody understand regarding about art, culture, and they are kind of like execute their scientific discoveries through machines and things like that. Like basically what I'm trying to tell you is this thing. Before that, like let's just say that ki 1200 year before. Okay, yeah. At that time there was an empire and things like that. By the way, in the Renaissance era there is also empire too. But what I'm trying to tell you is this thing that ki like like basically is this thing, it's very hard to kind of like simply explain this stuff. It's not really hard, but in the Renaissance era most of the people are kind of like a little bit educated and little bit kind of like simply lean towards kind of like a finding new creativity and things like that, specifically in art, painting, sculpture. These are kind of like some monuments are actually built in Renaissance era. I'm trying to talk you specifically in Europe because the Renaissance era is actually focused on Europe. There are multiple kind of like a simply like a artist and multiple kind of like some people who are born at that particular age. They kind of like simply gift us. They are kind of like giving us really bigger gift in human society, like Da Vinci. Okay, yeah, he's a father of anatomy. He's a father of like everything. Okay, yeah. Then Pablo Picasso. Okay, yeah, painting really amazing. Then I'm not really sure, but there are more of like there are very people like basically Isaac Newton was also kind of like some Isaac Newton. Probably Isaac Newton actually born in probably 1600 centuries. Probably I'm not really sure about that, but Isaac Newton is also kind of like born in Renaissance era. Then Galileo, yes, Galileo is kind of like a person who kind of like somebody realized that ki Earth is a sphere, not flat. By the way, not Galileo, Aristotle. Sorry, Aristotle is a person who kind of like somebody figure it out that ki our Earth is a sphere, not flat. Okay, yeah. So there is a lot of kind of like somebody innovation is actually happened in this particular era. Okay, yeah. And from human point of perspective, this era is far more essential. Okay, because lot of invention is actually happened. Like basically, before that, very less invention was actually happening. Like right now in this like in the world that we are living right now, we are kind of like inventing lot of stuff. By the way, more than Renaissance era, but today's world we have a lot of technology and things like that. So it's kind of like inventing new thing is far more easier than us, easier for us. But in Renaissance era, try to invent something which kind of like far more difficult, or even if kind of like even if you invented something, you won't be able to share to the public and things like that. Take an example as a Galileo. Galileo is a kind of like a person who kind of like a somebody determined that ki Earth is not flat, Earth is a sphere. Okay, yeah, and Earth is not the center of the universe. Is kind of like a somebody Earth is a part of the universe, and we are not revolve like the sun is not revolve around us. We are revolve around the sun. Okay, so these are kind of like a some major contribution are actually given by the Galileo. But at that time, the church was kind of like so powerful, and they think that this statement is kind of like something completely wrong, because our God is actually created us. Okay, our God is actually created this kind of like some universe and things like that, and we are the center of the universe. The sun and moon and everything actually revolve around us. This kind of like a statement is actually from the church, but when the Galileo is actually proved them wrong, the church is kind of like a feel that no, this is you shouldn't supposed to be say this thing. So the church is kind of like a give them punishment to lifetime imprisonment, and this is kind of like a simply way much, yeah. So what I'm trying to tell you is this thing at that time is Renaissance era. Most of people are kind of like simply inventing so many things, which is far more difficult. And even if you after invent so many things, you might not able to kind of like share your thought process to the world and things like that, because it's not even possible, or it's not even kind of like simply allowed to do that thing. Okay, yeah. But in today's world, we are kind of like inventing a lot of things, and we also kind of like share our invention to the world and things like that. Let's talk about the Renaissance era. In the Renaissance era, yes, people are kind of like inventing a lot of things, specifically in art, specifically in paintings, which is kind of like something far more crazy. Because let me tell you one thing, in this particular era, our imagination is kind of like somebody started booming. What do you mean by that? Like basically this thing before that, we are kind of like do the painting, okay, yeah, but we are kind of like doing a painting kind of like some very rough way and things like that. But in the Renaissance era, we are trying to figure it out, how do we supposed to paint and how do we supposed to create the art. Like basically painting is one of the kind of like one of the crucial skills that humans actually develop, like a kind of like a precisely developed in Renaissance era. People are kind of like somebody creating portraits in a such a way that it kind of like look really beautiful. By the way, before the Renaissance era, there is no way to do a kind of like a painting, or there is no kind of like a something a painting was kind of like a something a thing. Okay, yeah. like basically what I'm trying to tell you is this thing, like if I kind of like take a photo of you, okay, yeah, and I will show that photo to you, you might feel really good because of that ki you are actually seeing yourself, that ki how does other people sees me, okay, yeah. In Renaissance era, painting is the only way that you could capture yourself regarding about how do you look and how do you kind of like simply convey that who you are and things you are. Like at that time, na painting was kind of like simply one of the trending thing, probably, if I'm gonna say, okay, hot topic. People are kind of like somebody wanting to do painting, and most of people are wanting to portray their photo like things and that, something like that. It is like a really crazy stuff. Okay, so Renaissance era is really amazing. Okay, there is a lot of invention that actually happened. Okay, yeah, as I mentioned, Pythagoras. Pythagoras is also really like the Pythagoras theorem is actually evolved and that period of time. Aristotle, Galileo, Isaac Newton, then Da Vinci. Okay, yeah, the Leonardo da Vinci. He was really amazing person. The way that his invention was like really crazy. That by God, oh my, oh, really amazing. Okay, yeah. Then algebra. Okay, yeah. By the way, algebra is actually kind of like assembly started in Islamic world. Okay, yeah. Like basically, the mathematic term we are actually kind of like assembly learn as algebra. It's a algebra. Okay, yeah. It's a like basically there is a kind of like assembly name of that particular person who kind of like a figure it out a language of mathematics. Okay, yeah. Algebra, okay, yeah, and that kind of like assembly, like this is actually from kind of like assembly probably Iraq and Iran. I'm not really sure, but algebra is actually come from the Islamic world. Okay, yeah, in the same era, in the Renaissance era. So basically, algebra is also kind of like assembly established in Renaissance era and things like that. Okay, yeah. Also at that time, in the Renaissance era, we are kind of like somebody try to look our world in very different way. Okay, yeah, we are kind of like somebody try to utilize more and more machines. Okay, yeah, to how do we supposed to kind of like somebody execute and things like that. Like machines means like that. Na, ki I'm not trying to tell you kind of like somebody machines means like a kind of like a somebody simple way that how do you supposed to execute the machine to do the work and things like that, or maybe I don't know. Okay, like take an example as a kind of like a Galileo's gadgets. Okay, the helicopter and kind of like assembly the things. Okay, yeah. By the way, at that time, Benjamin Franklin was also kind of like invented the electricity. By the way, but sorry, the Benjamin Franklin was actually kind of like in US. Okay, yeah, it's not Europe, is it? Yeah, probably is this thing. I'm not really sure, but Benjamin Franklin is actually from US. He's not actually from Europe. Okay, so basically the invention of electricity is actually in, yeah, probably. Okay, so this is the Renaissance era. So basically from human point of perspective, Renaissance era is kind of like a far more essential, and lot of inventions and lot of kind of like some artwork is kind of like some invention in this particular era. Okay, or maybe the groundwork is actually established in this particular era. Okay, now the question is that ki what if that Renaissance era is actually started in America? Okay, what if kind of like assembly in instead of kind of like Europe, the Renaissance era is established in US or American plateau? Then what would be that? Like a Red Indian civilization, Aztec civilization, Mayan civilization are kind of like assembly established a kind of like a innovation. Then we call it as a kind of like assembly Renaissance. Like basically we just kind of like a think that create a kind of like assembly assumption or create that reality that Renaissance era is actually established in America. Okay, then what would be that world? What would be the consequences? What is there is this thing? First of all, now if I'm trying to think about all the possible thing, it's very hard to like basically what I'm trying to tell you is this thing, na? Like it's not just kind of like simply the word that I say and things happen. Like basically is this thing. There is no kind of like a person who kind of like established the Renaissance, and basically the at that time people don't really call it as a kind of like a Renaissance. It just what I'm trying to tell you is this thing. Okay, yeah, there is no person who kind of like control the Renaissance era and where it happened and things and that and that. No, nothing really happened. Okay, yeah. What I'm trying to tell you is this thing that ki if I'm kind of like somebody say that I wanted to build a castle. Okay, yeah. I wanted to build a castle. Then what do I need? I need a kind of like a simply raw material. Okay, yeah. That raw material should supposed to be exist over there. Okay, yeah. When I have raw material, then I make the castle, right? Na? If I don't really have a raw material, how do I supposed to make castle? Or basically is this thing I have to be kind of like a bring those raw material from somewhere and then I bring castle, but it takes time and things like that. What I'm trying to tell you is this thing that ki Europe is not kind of like somebody selected. Europe is a kind of like somebody is this thing that ki like a way more civilization, like the first civilization, the African civilization, like a basically Mesopotamia and kind of like a simply Egyptian civilization, and all those civilizations that actually started exist in Africa, Middle East, and then it went to the Europe. So basically what I'm trying to tell you is this thing, the large population are actually exist in Europe since the beginning of human existence. Since the beginning of human existence, like basically the first human is actually arrive in America is far year ago. And basically the way that development is actually happened in Aztec or Mayan civilization or any Red Indian civilization is far less, because they don't really have any kind of like information that beyond the America there is a kind of like another world is actually exist. And as also we don't even know that ki beyond the Atlantic there is a world is actually exist. Okay, so what I'm trying to tell you is this thing, if I'm gonna say the European civilization, in the European civilization, Mesopotamia, an entire kind of like European civilization and American civilization, if I'm find a kind of like difference, there is a lot of differences that I could found. Lot of differences. Okay, the knowledge, the information, the kind of like the way that they lives and things like that. Okay, yeah. Like what I'm trying to tell you is this thing, the European civilization are far more advanced than American civilization. Mayan, like I'm not gonna say that they are not really advanced. Like they are kind of like some invented farming. They are kind of like a figure it out the trade routes, and they are kind of like some try to invent the look at the time and kind of like understand the kind of like some read the sky and things like that. But still, the way that progress is actually happened in the European civilization is far ahead than American civilization. Yeah, and the lot of kind of like innovation is actually happened in European civilization. Because of that, European civilization actually connected with another civilization like Indus Valley civilization, Indian civilization, then Chinese civilization. Okay, yeah, then Russian civilization. Like there are multiple civilizations actually kind of connected to each other, and because of they are connected to each other, they are kind of like sharing the information. Okay, yeah, like example is this thing, the Aryabhatta who kind of like invented a zero. Okay, yeah, like basically what I'm trying to tell you is in the mathematic terms we actually invented 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 9, but after the 9 we don't really know what kind of like assembly the number should supposed to be executed. Okay, yeah, and mathematician always kind of like assembly not really sure regarding about that. But the kind of like assembly Indian plateau, the Indian civilization, the Southeast civilization are kind of like assembly figure it out, we should supposed to be execute such a number that add a value to the number. Okay, yeah. So that's why in Aryabhatta they are kind of like invented as a zero, and that zero invention was kind of like a went from your Indian civilization to the European civilization, and because of this thing actually happened, they are kind of like invented the algebra, mathematics, and lot of stuff like a Pythagoras and every possible ways. Then the kind of like a basic mathematics languages are actually established and kind of like assembly we understand much more better way. Okay, yeah. So what I'm trying to tell you is this thing, the European civilization actually far more ahead in its every possible way, because European civilization actually getting lot of kind of like information from every possible way, from every civilization, this civilization, like a Indus Valley civilization, like African civilization, Egyptian civilization, Mesopotamian civilization, Chinese civilization. Okay, yeah, and there is a lot of kind of like information actually gathered in Europe. So that's why Europe are kind of like a simply very fertile land for kind of like a consuming the knowledge and things like that. So the example that I mentioned, that if I wanted to make a castle, I need a raw material, and that raw material are kind of like accumulated in one place called Europe, and that's why these raw material are kind of like created such a thing that we call it as a Renaissance era. So basically, Renaissance era is a kind of like a called as a kind of like a castle that I'm trying to tell you. Okay, so this is what it is. Now, regarding about if I try to compare the American civilization, it's far more less advanced than Europe. Far more less advanced because probably if I'm gonna say that ki in the Renaissance era, which civilization is kind of like a far more ahead, then I would gonna say that ki European civilization actually far more ahead. As also then after that ki probably African civilization, not African, like a Middle East civilization, like the Islamic world civilization. Okay, yeah. Then probably Chinese civilization. Okay, because Chinese actually kind of like started writing way early. Okay, yeah. So they have kind of like some very significant evidence regarding about writing. Then Indian civilization, and then after that American civilization. Okay, yeah, because American civilization actually cut off from rest of the world. They didn't know anything about that. They didn't know what kind of like mathematics, the language. They didn't really invented the mathematics language. Like a still, I'm not really sure about that, but still they are actually far more beyond, like a far more like the comparison between kind of like simply the European civilization and American civilization is just like it's not possible, dude. Okay, from every possible way, Renaissance should supposed to be executed in Europe. It shouldn't supposed to be executed in like a the raw material actually exists in Europe, so that's why the Renaissance is actually started in Europe. So yeah, but if I'm trying to think about that, what if American civilization actually started the Renaissance, then first of all, it's very hard to consume this information. It's very hard to digest that thing. But still, if I wanted to make sure, then probably very less invention was actually happened. Probably because still, okay, yeah, informations really matter. Okay, yeah, American civilization might not invented that many things. Okay, yeah, like they might not invented the kind of like some anatomy that the Leonardo is actually kind of like invented. Okay, yeah, human anatomy. Okay, yeah, the Pythagoras, Aristotle, Galileo, their contributions kind of like much more amazing. Those contributions actually came from the language of mathematics. That mathematics language actually came from algebra. The algebra languages actually come from the mathematics which has a zero. So, and that zero language is actually came from the India, and the information actually passed through from Indian civilization to the European civilization. How that kind of like information went through Indian to American civilization, this is not actually possible, na. So it's very hard to imagine that what kind of like it's not in every possible way. American civilization is far more beyond than European civilization. So Renaissance might not gonna happen over there. And like basically, I'm not gonna say that ki your American civilization they don't really invented that many things. They invented like they have kind of like simply the sculpture like basically the pyramid shape kind of like the Mayan civilization kind of like do that thing as a like a pyramid shape sculpture which is kind of like really good. Okay, yeah. But like basically is this thing now right now the information that I have still information that I have I might be kind of completely wrong, but if I'm gonna say that ki what kind of like assembly the innovation that human civilization get from European civilization, there are far more list like a lot of kind of like some people, lot of kind of like things. But if I'm gonna say what kind of like innovation that I get from American civilization or Aztec civilization or kind of like a Mayan civilization or Red Indian civilization, what kind of like information that you have? Probably nothing. Okay, yeah. Because let me tell you one thing now. Okay, yeah. The humans are started exist in Africa, and most of the migration actually went from Africa to Europe, and then it went to kind of like India, and then it went to kind of like some China, Russia, and then it went to kind of like somebody America. Okay, yeah. So what I'm trying to tell you is this thing: after a many hundred, after many years after the entire continent of America, North and South America, they are not kind of like assembly invented by the Europe or like they are not kind of like assembly that key the humans does not even exist over there. Like exist, yeah, definitely, but the migration was actually happened very late in America. So probably it's like basically this thing, America is not became the fertile land for kind of like consuming that much information and things like that, right? So and another thing na ki usually this thing what is actually happened na when the ice age was actually happened, then Alaska and kind of like something like the Russia and Alaska are actually connected. Okay, they have kind of like connected land. Okay, because of the kind of like some rise like the water level is kind of like a drop down so much because of the ice age, and that's why kind of like actually most of the kind of like actually migration, human migration went from Russia through Alaska to America. Okay, and after the ice age happened, and those bridge are kind of like a collapse. So there is no connection between the kind of like some American civilization and rest of the civilization. So probably and there is no way that we could connect to American civilization to Europe because there is a massive ocean is actually exist, Atlantic Ocean. So it is not gonna possible. Okay, so in every possible way, Renaissance should supposed to be executed in Europe. Okay, yeah. Might be if I'm gonna say that ki maybe the Renaissance era should supposed to be started in India too, because in India there is a kind of like a lot of fertile land and there is a lot of people who are kind of like simply executed a lot of mines and things like that. But still in India things might be very different because in India we have kind of like a way much believe in gods and things like that. Okay, because in India we have kind of like a multiples of caste and creeds and kind of like cultures and things like that, and most of the humans and most of the early humans are kind of like accumulated in that particular rituals and things like that. So they are not really focused on science and that many stuff. Okay, but the Islamic world and kind of like the European civilization are kind of like a far more advanced at that time. They kind of like essentially determine the mathematics and kind of like essentially biology and kind of like essentially the looking at the stars and lot of stuff. So in every possible way, Renaissance should supposed to be executed in Europe. There is no way that it should supposed to be executed in any kind of any part of the world. Nothing really at all, because Europe is became very fertile land over there for consuming information and kind of like make that information into the kind of like assembly of knowledge or innovation. All right. Okay, I should supposed to be end here. This is it. Also, the information that I'm trying to tell you is not exactly right or is not exactly wrong. It's just my opinion. So if you wanted to seek any kind of like information, go to the internet. You have multiple sources. Believe that. Don't believe this. It's just my opinion. All right. Okay. Thank you.